Good morning, everyone, and welcome. My name's James Harding. I'm the editor and co-founder of Tortoise, and I'm really delighted and actually grateful to Michelle Mitchell, who's the Chief Executive of Cancer Research UK. Good morning, Michelle.
Morning.
Thank you for joining us on this beautiful morning. We're really grateful to you for joining us because one of the things that's been so strange about this last year has been how incredibly difficult it is to be able to think of more than one thing at a time. And one of the reasons we were so keen to try and understand what was happening in terms of not just cancer research, but the treatment of cancer patients or the treatment of those people who don't yet even know that they've got cancer, but are going to have to address that in the months ahead, is that this is a chance for us to think about, if you like, the hangover of COVID. And I know that there's something that goes against the grain of this sunny Tuesday morning and thinking to ourselves, well, this is the sort of day after the first glimpse of easing, and already we're leaning into what are the next set of problems that the pandemic has caused. But I think that there is this sense that there's a big set of issues around cancer care that we need to address, and we're really grateful to have you to join us. You'll have seen the way in which we do these Tuesday morning breakfast thinkings is that I'll pepper you with, questions and thoughts, but the aim of our thinkings is that they're really open, that people will weigh in. And so my colleague Liz Mosley is here on the chat, and she will, try and, catch my attention, direct things my way, and I'll bring in as many people as I can. So in the course of the hour, that you're not just hearing from me, you're hearing from a host of.
I've been promised it's going to be lively, James.
It'll be lively. It'll be lively. We'll see. Not least because every one of us, you mentioning just before we got started, Michelle, will have been on a run. They'll have made the most of the dawn sunshine, and they'll come out,
full of. In fact, outside my window, all I can hear is the pitter patter of runners and walkers. So certainly, people are enjoying this glorious morning. It's great to be here, and thanks for everyone for joining.
Well, thank you for coming along. Michelle, why don't we start though with the sort of where we are now? You hear a lot of people talking about the hangover of COVID. In terms of cancer care and cancer treatment, what's the outlook? What's the situation we're in now?
Well, we've worked so hard to ensure that cancer treatment and cancer research has been high on the agenda right throughout the period of COVID, but we have to focus on that other C, which is cancer, of course. And to give you a sense of what's happened, during the height of the pandemic, thousands of people went undiagnosed, tests and treatments were disrupted, and clinical trials were paused or slowed down. And so we've worked hard to model what the impact of that would be. So figures show for us about 44,000 fewer people started cancer treatments across the UK between April and January. That's 2020 to 21. And while this figure looks specifically at its treatment, it's largely because people didn't come forward with the signs and symptoms of cancer. We've seen the NHS put under enormous pressure to protect cancer services, but at this point, we think it will take months, if not years, to get back to pre-pandemic levels for cancer services. And this is a huge worry for a variety of reasons, one of which is we all know the earlier you are diagnosed with cancer, the better your chance of survival. So we have potentially 44,000 people in our communities who have cancer and who aren't in the system at the moment.
And is that number, Michelle, pretty stable? As in, if you say 44,000 fewer have come forward for treatment, is it, if you look over a 5-year period, pretty normal that you would have between April and January that number of people?
No, not at all. So this is 44,000 new people who are the missing cancer patients who aren't in the system as a result of COVID. And that's because during the first wave of the national lockdown, many clinical trials were paused or halted. The fact that people took it literally, stay home and keep the NHS safe, and they didn't come forward with signs and symptoms. So this is a really important ticking issue behind the headlines, because they would have been in the NHS, they would have been receiving tests and treatments in any other year. And we feel really worried because For the first time in decades, cancer mortality could increase and cancer survival could decrease. And this is particularly upsetting, for all of our families, friends, loved ones. 1 in 2 of us will get cancer by 2035. It's an issue that affects many of us. In a typical year, about 3,677 people are diagnosed with cancer, new cancer cases. So we all know somebody, but at the moment we have this issue. And of course, the NHS staff have worked incredibly hard during COVID. In fact, during the second and more recent waves, they've been able to retain many cancer services, many cancer treatments, so learned how to adapt during COVID, innovated, tried new ways of delivering treatments and services, so improved over time, but were left with a legacy of those missing cancer patients. And if you step back for a moment and think about this.
Can I just understand one thing, which is, I appreciate there are two elements to this. There are people who've been unwilling to come into hospitals to check out any concerns they may have about their health. There's also been the prioritisation within hospitals. So can you just split those out for us? How much of those 44,000 do you think sit with that reluctance to come in and be tested, and how much of it will be treated, and how much of it is actually the NHS has genuinely struggled to cope?
So it depends on which period of the COVID you're looking at. So during the first period, there was the stalling of clinical trials, the postponement of surgery in some areas, screening was stood down. So the first wave, we saw a huge impact. Since then, the NHS has worked really hard to get those surgery back up, to get treatments to people, has started screening, but we would conclude and say the vast majority of those 44,000 are a result of people not now coming forward with signs and symptoms. But it's a double whammy, because we are not the highest performance country in Europe in relation to cancer. Often we're seeing as one of the lowest, in the bottom third of cancer performance. So we have these great ambitions about improving cancer survival, diagnosing people earlier in their stage of cancer, stage 1 and 2, when survival is much more likely. And we've got a whole set of things to do in any event, not least because of COVID. And we've got a couple of substantive issues here. One is we don't have the workforce and the numbers of people that's required to treat people today, and the growing number of people who will get cancer. And our diagnostics, our tests and equipment is pretty poorly invested in. So, workforce, diagnostics, new cancer treatments are all part of the solution to helping this situation get better, as is also encouraging people to come forward with signs and symptoms. Here in the UK, unlike Italy, if you've got a persistent cough, if you've got all different symptoms of potentially cancer, people don't want to bother their doctor. And what we're saying is absolutely come forward now with signs and symptoms. The earlier you're diagnosed, the better chance of survival you have.
So you've got the 44,000 who are currently, if you like, not in the system. Presumably, I don't know what the number is, Michelle, you've got a number of people who in late March 2020 were queued for treatment, but who may have found their treatments delayed. Is there a significant backlog of people awaiting cancer treatment who had already been diagnosed?
That is smaller than you would anticipate, but it depends on which type of cancer you have. So, for example, we know with particularly breast cancer, services are largely up and running. With lung cancer and urology, prostate, there remains a persistent problem. So how the NHS is looking at its performance is basically saying, have we got back to pre-pandemic levels? And the picture is improving generally over the last quarter, but it does depend on which type of cancer you've got. And an area we're particularly worried about is lung cancer, because of people having coughs and persistent coughs, thinking that's COVID. They go for a test, they don't have COVID, they're not being investigated for that. So lung cancer is a particularly worrying area at the moment. That's why there's been major advertising campaigns in your local communities encouraging people to come forward. But on the whole, and that's a big on the whole, on average, the NHS is dealing with the people who are in the system now.
And then we had Jeremy Hunt, the former health secretary, now chair of the health select committee, on the week before last, Michelle. And actually, one of the things he mentioned was the extent to which we're not really honest with ourselves as a country about the range of outcomes in our healthcare system. Particularly, he said, the extent to which cancer care lags, comparable countries in developed economies. And so I wondered whether or not you could explain just what's our cancer care like by comparison with other countries.
So Jeremy is absolutely right that we don't do well compared to a number of other countries, and the reason for that is complex and varied, but in a simple way of describing it is we don't diagnose people early enough. So we know the earlier you diagnose people, the greater your survival rates. Only 54% of people are diagnosed at stage 1 and 2. So the big challenge is to get to people sooner. In the health system, depending on what type of cancer you have, your survival differs, depends on where you live around the country. But some of the things we know that would make a big difference is people coming forward with signs and symptoms of cancer, that primary care, your GPs particularly, having the confidence and the resources to refer into the NHS for further tests and tests particularly and diagnostics. I think the other is when we look at screening, what are the ways in which we can improve screening? We have a number of screening programs here, but how do you risk stratify screening so that if you've got a greater propensity for cancer or greater risk for cancer, you get on a screening program? And critically, having workforce and equipment in there, as well as a whole new pipeline of research and innovation to ensure people get new treatments which are kinder and more effective to them quickly. So when you say how to improve cancer survival and quality of life, it isn't a silver bullet. There's not one thing you need to do. It's a mix of all of those levers that I've just talked about.
So Michelle, I'm going to bring in a moment Finola O'Connor. I see has made some points about resilience within the research world, and also I see Elena Sofronevich has made a point about this idea of Office for Health Promotion. But before we do, I just wanted to just spend a minute more, if you like, on this underperformance. I think that's probably a slightly bureaucratic way of describing it, but the relative failure of the UK in terms of cancer treatments. And I suppose I'm intrigued to know, one, what's the range of outcomes within hospitals in the NHS? How much does your likelihood of survival depend on where you live and your local hospital? And is there something that is true for the NHS as a whole by comparison with healthcare, let's say in Germany, Italy, or Spain?
Sure. So I would say variation. If you were to say what is the most important factor in variation, it's not really about the performance of your hospital per se. There's something that trumps that, and that's whether you are living in a deprived area or not. So what we know is that health inequalities more broadly have a big impact on whether you will get cancer. 30,000 more cases, we feel, are a result of inequality. So if you're poor, you live in a deprived area, you smoke, which is of course one of the biggest modifiable risk to help prevent cancer. You're obese, your risk levels around cancer are much higher. So those combination of factors can result in, particularly if it also involves slow presentation of signs and symptoms, poor performance and poor outcomes for people generally.
So just so I'm clear then, we're not saying that the problem we've got is on the wards. It's not in the hospitals. it's in inequalities within society.
So that's one factor. I think what slows us down, if you go to your point, why are other countries doing better than us when we have world-class research? We have too few referrals from primary care. We don't have the resources in place, that's workforce, specialist workforce, and the diagnostics, the tests that get people through the system quicker. So that's why we're saying, well, how would you improve your position? No silver bullet, but there'd be several things you do, including investing in more diagnostic equipment, investing in workforce, investing in research, encouraging people to come forward, encouraging GPs to refer at a greater level than they do currently. So all of these things together are what helps shift cancer survival. And there is a good news story within this, and we're not where we want to be. We've seen a doubling of cancer survival in the last 40 years in the UK, but we can look to other countries and say, if we get these ingredients right, there is no reason why we shouldn't be able to significantly improve cancer survival, and early diagnosis is at the heart of that too.
Right. Michelle, thanks. And I said, can I bring in Finola O'Connor, and I'm going to come to Yelena Sofnovic in a sec. Finola, you made a point really early about resilience, and as I'm expecting you're going to hear from Michelle, they've had to be quite resilient at Cancer Research UK this year. So do you want to put your point to Michelle?
Yeah, well, I'm Finola O'Connor. I help organisations kind of manage their people, and I've recently been working with a couple of cancer research organisations doing very different things, and it's really struck me just how complex the research network is. And that's in everything from, the focus much more on translational medicine, which inevitably has different actors, to just the complexity of the number of purely clinical research actors. And I suppose it's just made me think, it's reminded me of things like the retail supply chain field, which, we saw in the early stages of the pandemic when nobody could get loo rolls, felt very vulnerable. Last week we had that tanker stuck in the Suez Canal and world trade stops. And I suppose I'm just interested in how much has the balance shifted from a resilient system that has some slack in it to a very, very efficient, system with an emphasis on results, on timely delivery, a network where there isn't much slack. But I'd be really interested to hear what...
There's about 8 premises in that question. I'm going to have to... so the first thing, I'll take the point of resilience rather than efficiency and innovation, and perhaps come on to them. One of the things that might surprise everybody on this call is what's unique about the UK is Cancer Research UK. We fund 50% of all publicly funded cancer research, supported by the great British public. And and government funds a lot less than in many other countries, probably because we've been so successful over a decade. Now, what's happened is we have seen 160 million drop in our income in this year, financial year, and we're expecting a 300 million drop in income over 3 years. Why that matters is we've had to substantially cut our operating budget, as you would expect, reduce our staff, as you would expect, and then really sadly move from about 400 a year to 320 million for research. And that undoubtedly means fewer PhDs, fewer group leaders, less funding for our major institutes and centres, which will result in fewer breakthroughs. So in terms of the resilience of the system and ecosystem as it relates to cancer research has been absolutely battered, because we've been battered as a result of COVID. And government, despite calling all year I've been doing this on a rescue package, a cash package for medical research charities for 2 years to see us over this hump, we have not been successful. So the resilience of the cancer research system is threatened by the cuts we have to impose. In terms of a network, well, cancer research is a very complicated area of research and science. We operate from basic discovery research through to the bedside and translation and everything in between. Our researchers got really hard hit during the first wave of COVID, but are back on track broadly now. We're not quite up to where we were with clinical trials. And so we have seen a slowing of progression of research throughout the course of the year, but there has been considerable innovation as well. We have seen teams come together in a global and domestic setting, the policy and regulatory environment loosen up, and all of that has been important in reshaping the environment. But overall, I would say the main issue I would want to take away is that we are less resilient as we stand today because of the funding we have had to cut for research.
Well, thank you. Michelle, just talk us through that. I mean, I can't imagine how difficult that is organisationally, how you change when you lose that sum of money, £160 million, 300 million over coming years. What I don't know is, where do you turn? Who do you look to try and fill that gap?
Well, and to give you a sense of the scale, I'll repeat this scale. Because of COVID, we're anticipating a 300 million drop in income over a 3-year period, 160 million in year. What I had to do is very, very quickly, because we're a charity, we don't have an endowment, for example, like the Wellcome Trust. We commit our research in the long term and have to raise money every single year through our wonderful donors and supporters to back that money. So I have to be really careful about getting those numbers wrong and have to predict where I think we'll be in 3 years' time. So there's several things we did, and I'll group them into 3. One is immediately stopped expenditure in a vast majority of areas, because during a crisis, cash really matters. I mean, everybody understands that. Cash is queen rather than king, I like to say. We unfortunately put in a redundancy package for up to 500 posts in the organisation, so had to restructure, lose great, hugely talented people. I put everybody onto 80% pay for effectively a 4-day week. The exec board took a 20% pay cut. We then had to immediately make £44 million worth of cuts to our first research round, and that was to stabilise the finances. And it was because in our financial model, there are a number of activities which were really hit hard by COVID. And that was our shops closed. So we've got over 600 shops in your high street. I hope you will be going back to get a handbag. In the shops when they open, apparently they're going to be full of beautiful things that we've all been storing up. But also people couldn't take place in sporting events, you know, Race for Life and all of that. And that really hit our income hard. And we did several things. Thankfully, our generous supporters who give to us each and every month continue to do so. That people who leave money to us in their wills continue to do so. Largely our corporate partners, for example, Tesco's, we've got a big partnership with Diabetes UK and the British Heart Foundation. They stood by us, and generous philanthropists who have helped us out. But still, it remains the case that face a huge shortfall. And I've had to put now a 3-year plan in place. I mean, it's absolutely galling, but to see our research spend go from 400 effectively to 300, and that's assuming my plan's right. You know, I'm hoping my plan's wrong in the sense that it's much better than I'm predicting, and we can change those numbers around our research spend quickly. But of course, it's uncertain, and I can't gamble with the future of the country's largest public fundraising charity. Government.
Yeah, I just wanted to understand the charitable giving element of this, as in how I know you talk about the great British public, and I appreciate the fact that cancer research, you know, is the largest publicly funded charity. But when you break it down, is that largely inheritances? Is that big ticket philanthropists? Where's, if you want to build it back up from 300 to 400 million spending on research, who are you going to look to provide that money?
Well, the first thing is we want our shops open so people can go to our shops. We want to be able for people to take part in mass participation events, for example, Race for Life. They're the two main risk areas. And then in terms of our fundraising portfolio, we want to continue to inspire people to give to us to fund life-saving research. We have over 1 million people who give us £10 or more a month. Biggest proportion of our income comes from people leaving us money in their wills and their legacies. And we have a healthy stream around corporate partnerships and philanthropists. So each and every one of those is an important contribution, but as a charity, what you don't want to be is ever dependent on one source of income, because look what can happen. I'm really disappointed though that the government, who have said consistently science has been the thing that is going to lead us out of lockdown and COVID, that has ambitions about being a scientific global superpower. We are world leading here in the UK in cancer research. So we are world leading in science. We have an NHS free at the point of need. We have these massive longitudinal data sets. We have some of the best people from the UK and from around the world working here in the UK on cancer research. And we are going to lose our global competitiveness if we have to effectively take out 300 million plus in the next 3 years and have no support from government. I mean, we have every confidence we're going to bounce back. We've innovated lots. We're in shape. We really are in a good shape. I need 2 years really to get back to where we were before. If government came to us and committed to the Life Sciences Charity Partnership Fund, which we're calling for, I could put every penny of that into research. They have not been persuaded yet.
How much do you need?
So we, as part of the Association of Medical Research Charities, we're saying at least just 325 million for 1 year, but that's for the whole of all of the medical research charities, not just Cancer Research UK. And if they were to extend it for 3 years, it would be up to 700 million. What we've seen is medical.
Sorry, Michelle, this is called the Life Sciences Charity
Partnership Fund.
Okay.
And so effectively for every £2 people give to those charities and give to us, government would give £1. So it's an incentive scheme really. And the purpose of it is to ensure we don't have to make these cuts to research, because it's not like turning on and off a shop. These are world-class scientists in world-leading institutes, and it's taken us a decade to build this infrastructure, build it on the back of the support people have given us, but you can't turn it back on and off easily. People will go to other parts of the world to work.
And there's a lively conversation between Kate Anstruder and someone going by the name of Stancliffe's iPad about the culture of giving and the incentives of giving in the UK versus the US. Mm-hmm. And I mean, people will know this, Michelle, but you work for Age UK. You sit on the board, you're a director of NHS England.
I did until the 31st of March, so I don't know if that was good or my 4 years was up then, so I don't know if that was good or bad timing, but that was last year, yeah.
On 31st of March last year. I thought you meant 31st of March, as in tomorrow.
Yeah,
So but my point is, you've seen sort of, public funded healthcare. Obviously, you've got a good experience of, philanthropy and giving. What's your view of the nature of our marketplace, the extent to which we incentivize giving, the relationship between private giving and public funding?
So if the question is specifically around philanthropy rather than mass donations, I think the UK has got a huge amount to learn from the US. In fact, one of the things that we've been focused on, ran a very successful campaign for several years, raised 100 million for the CRIC, which is based in London, largest biomedical centre, research centre under one roof in Europe, considered to be in the top 3 biomedical institutes now in the world, only years after being born. So we have some experience of particularly running a capital fundraising appeal of that type. What we are learning to do at the moment is really inspire donors, not just philanthropists here in the UK, but particularly in the US. We launched a program called the Cancer Grand Challenges, and this is an important part of our research portfolio. It's effectively bringing the best and the brightest from anywhere in the world to form collaborative teams to answer the biggest, most audacious questions in cancer research. So we're agnostic geographically where they are. And because that was so exciting around the world, we had 2 major US philanthropists who came in and gave us our biggest gifts ever to support this work. That also inspired the national science.
Sorry, just give people a sense of it. The 2 biggest gifts that you got from American donors, how much did they talk?
25. The biggest was 25 million.
And what was the biggest that you'd ever received from a UK donor?
I would say, from an individual rather than a company, I think it was about 5 or 6 million before. But some people are very generous and give over multiple years.
But even when you're talking about 5 times the size.
Yeah, and this also meant that the science was so amazing. It was a new product for a new market in cancer research that the National Cancer Institute, who's the largest funder of cancer research in the world, wanted to form a partnership for us and brought another 250 million to the table to expand this work. Doesn't cover our costs, but it expands this fantastic work, building a global community, people working in over 40 different countries in these cross-boundary teams. And what we're working on now is expanding our experience and our offer to US-based philanthropists around this piece of work. And to the specific point of your question, we have a lot to learn. It's a globally competitive market. Our science is brilliant. It's world-class. Our scientists are world-class, but we need to engage with people over the long term to be successful with philanthropy. We need to understand how they want to give, and there are many different ways in which people want to give and the type of relationship that they have with you. And although we're very experienced in relation to the UK market in philanthropy and corporate partnerships, we recognise that there's some learning for us to operate on that global scale. And I recently employed a fantastic US-based leader who is leading the development of this new program of work for us based in the US.
Michelle, thanks. There are a bunch of people who are making points and questions. I want to bring them in. I said, sorry, Elaine, I said ages ago that I'd come to you. So Elaine, you had a point about this Office for Health Promotion. Do you want to make the point to Michelle?
Yeah, of course. I just really wanted to know what Michelle thought of Johnson's proposed Office for Health Promotion. And I'm really interested that you were talking about the fact there's no silver bullet for cancer cause and treatment, and that we need to have a much more holistic understanding of health outcomes and how they tie in with health and socioeconomic inequalities. I think I've been looking at this a bit more recently from the perspective of air pollution. And I was really interested to kind of read more about the very tragic case of Ella Kasi-Deborah back in December, and seeing how deprived communities often bear the burden of air pollution and how that exacerbates existing health inequalities. And I was interested then to read about the Office for Health Promotion, because in the report it says that 80% of people's health outcomes aren't related to the healthcare they receive, the point that Michelle was making, but rather due to these wider preventable risk factors like diet and smoking and exercise. But I wonder whether, identifying those things as risk factors will ignore seeing them as symptoms of wider socioeconomic inequality rather than the cause themselves. And I don't know what Michelle thinks of that.
Yeah, thank you. Look, prevention in health is absolutely critical. When you think 4 in 10 cancers are preventable. Not all cancers are preventable, of course, but the risk factors. smoking remains the biggest modifiable risk factor, followed by obesity and then alcohol in relation to cancer. But what we know is the health outcomes of our citizens in some of the most deprived communities is incredibly poor, and it's a complex mix of housing, work, employment, education. All of those things play a part in influencing people's health outcomes. We've had a major program of work now, gosh, since about 94, 95 on prevention. And when we look at our research, we were first with Richard Dole was the first, particularly in the UK, to establish the link between smoking, tobacco and cancer. We campaigned for years to get smoking banned in public places. Then it was the marketing around the cigarette packaging, smoking then in cars and enclosed spaces. And we continue to push really hard on having smoking cessation services in place right across the country, because in some communities, particularly some of the most deprived, although we're seeing a decline in smoking generally, in the most deprived, I think it's up to 26% of people smoking in Blackpool, and then the proportion of people in some of the most deprived areas of Blackpool, and then the very high rates of pregnant women smoking in those areas. So, you look at that and think, well, what's the intervention that we can make? Again, no silver bullets, but a renewed focus on smoking cessation and support is absolutely critical. And we've seen those services be cut by local authorities right across the UK. Doesn't make sense, does it? So some of the stuff around the new body, well, we don't fully know yet how it's going to be set up. They announced better guidance yesterday, but we're really concerned that focus on prevention and cancer, which was very strong within public health England before, cannot be lost. I mean, that was driving a really coherent approach, albeit not with the right level of funding, and that would be a huge mistake if that was lost. So we're working behind the scenes to make sure that happens. And then finally, I mean, part of my experience of working on I was a non-exec on NHS England, was really working with Lord Victor Abdulwale, who's on the board with me at the time, to get inequality as an issue that the NHS could and should respond to. And it's got a long way to go, but we're beginning to see a stronger commitment to changing the resource profile to the most deprived areas and having a focus on communities where it's most greatly needed. But prevention is absolutely key to all of this too.
Thank you. Michelle, can I ask you one thing? What prevents us from making smoking illegal, from banning it entirely?
Well, I think it should be, but it's business interests really that outweigh. There's an argument about it's a legal product. It's a legal product, and people should have the choice to, as adults, or young adults, to take it or not. But I think it's a pernicious industry that hooks people and children young, and to be addicted to tobacco is a very, very hard thing. It's not easy to give up, and people need support to do that.
Michelle, have we seen the data for the crossover between COVID deaths and smokers?
We have. There are a number of risk factors, of course, with COVID. Being obese is one. Respiratory issues and illnesses is another, which can be exacerbated by smoking or pollution. But yes, it's challenging. I mean, it's not a good thing. It's not a healthy thing to smoke, and people need support. They don't need blame. They need support to stop it, because what we've seen even in our research more recently, stopping at any age is better than carrying on.
The reason I'm interested is there are certain moments where you can change accepted norms in a society after a pandemic. It seems like there's one. I'm intrigued to know why there wouldn't be a push. There's clearly going to be a push around obesity. There's a question whether there's one around smoking too, but I don't know whether you get the sense that there is political momentum around that.
Well, I think there's political momentum and commitment rhetorically around smoking.
Yeah.
So you look at the NHS plans. There's great aspirations to zero tolerance around smoking, to get the numbers down significantly over the years ahead. It doesn't quite fit with the cutting of the smoking cessation services across the country. So there's a policy objective, but perhaps the support isn't where it needs to be. Obesity, I think there's less public consensus around obesity, and I don't know if you read the newspapers only a few days ago, where the government had a green paper on prevention. It was indicating it was going to move forward with a range of policy initiatives, including calories on food products, 9 p.m. watershed on unhealthy foods. It's not clear where all of that is going, but clearly obesity is a massive public health issue for us.
Michelle, let me bring in a few other people. Ilaria Pizzikemi made an interesting point earlier on about detection and the role of the NHS, but the role also of other organisations that might help with detection. And Ilaria, I don't know whether you're there and happy to weigh in at this stage.
Yeah, hi.
Morning.
Sorry, I pressed send on my accidentally before actually finishing elaborating my point. I was wondering, obviously you've talked before about funding and particularly funding research. I think it's a twofold question. One is about how much, what you were talking earlier about early detection, and how can cancer research can support the local kind of more traditional, if you wish, NHS structures like local GPs where the early detection fails. And I think a lot of it may be linked because of lack of resources, lack of the capabilities of GPs to refer people and so on and so forth, and how actually the big philanthropy funding that you were talking about on funding research, particularly, how can those two, how can cancer research, but also for me, full disclosure, I'm Italian, so I have felt what you were mentioning at the very early of your talk about the system here being slightly more difficult to navigate in terms of those early stages. And I think part of it is cultural, part of it is also the fact that maybe it's a once bitten, twice shy situation where people have found it difficult at those early stages. So I was wondering if one of the things that how would you go about using that kind of philanthropy to further help those early funds, or is it a case of actually lobbying for more government funding and for a better provision for those small structures and kind of embedded community level?
Yeah, really, really good question. So if we focus on perhaps three elements of this, one of which is what happens when before you get to a GP, you need encouraging to go with signs and symptoms. And men particularly tend to put it off. Generally, British people put it off, but men in particular don't want to bother the doctor, and that is a uniquely British thing when we've looked at all of the international evidence. I think the second thing, and Anna, you're absolutely right, is GPs need to have the knowledge and be able to identify signs and symptoms. And refer people into the system for further tests and diagnostics, and have confidence that they will be seen and treated quickly. One of the things that we fund is something called the GP Facilitators Programme, which is a quality improvement programme to help effectively in primary care build the knowledge of GPs, the confidence of GPs, improve their referral and processes, and then share that best practice at a Cancer Alliance level. I think more resources around workforce and diagnostics are critical, as I mentioned earlier, because that's going to make the system go faster. And then I think the third area is around innovation. And I'll give you 2 examples. So, for example, some people develop a condition called Barrett's esophagus, and then you get this prior to getting esophageal cancer. It presents an opportunity really for doctors to spot a problem early and intervene before cancer develops. But the typical test, endoscopy, is very invasive and it's very expensive. So one of our researchers in Cambridge has developed something called a Cyto sponge test, which is effectively a sponge on a string, coupled with a test, a specific test called TFF3, but you don't need to know that. And it's a quick, simple and affordable test for Barrett's esophagus that can be done in a GP surgery. So suddenly we're trialing and testing a cheaper, efficient, less invasive kind of treatment, which will get people earlier. We need multiple ways of doing that. The other is when you think of 90% of what we do in terms of our charitable spend is on research, although we do a lot of work with GPs and how you influence the health system. And in the field more broadly, there's a really exciting multi-cancer detection tests coming through. So these look at different biomarkers in the blood to decide whether it warrants further investigation. And we are able, through these markers or a combination of DNA mutations and protein biomarkers, identify whether people may have cancer. So what we're seeing is a huge change in how we'll be able to identify more people through new tests and diagnostics, and also potentially do that cheaper, which would mean, hopefully in the future, all the cost and expense around how we're doing it at the moment could be reduced. So these things all come into play. We've been around our GP facilitators program. It's been particularly corporate partners actually who have been interested in funding that work. And obviously we've been pleased to see that.
Michelle, thank you. I'm just aware of time, and as is often the case with these things, you suddenly get a whole.
It's going so quickly. I thought it would. I thought it would be a while, but it's flying by.
I know the time, and also now you've got. So Michelle, here are the things we're going to do. I want to touch on the points that are made from Vivian Lewis and Joshua Coney about obesity. As Stanley's iPad, I'm not sure, forgive me, I don't know your name, but I'm going to come to in a moment, which is about the reliance on charity and the problems associated with that. And then Bonnie McIntyre's making a point about what vaccine development is teaching us about cancer treatment. So I'm going to try and get to all of those. So let's start with the points about obesity. I'm going to come to Vivian Lewis and then Joshua Cole.
Thank you, James. Good morning. I'm very concerned that GPs are not taking a more active role in addressing morbid obesity in particular with their patients for fear of insulting or upsetting them. What do you feel about that?
I think we should use every interaction with patients and citizens to talk to them about smoking cessation and also to have a conversation about their weight and their health.
And do you think it's true though, Michelle, that there's an awkwardness around obesity that just doesn't exist around smoking? I mean, I don't think a doctor is kind of uncomfortable about telling you to quit smoking now, but they may be telling.
Well, they don't use every opportunity to do so. I mean, this is we've looked at a lot of the research in Ottawa and in Canada, and one of the things that really helps there is if you think about every interaction you would have in a health system, having those guided conversations about smoking cessation is really important. And that, I mean, I wouldn't assume that happens all the time. So I think making that mainstream, and I think we know so little about obesity. but that we have to be confident to have conversations with people about, the importance of keeping a healthy weight, the risks of not doing so, and give people the support they need to improve their situation. Again, I think it's a bit like smoking. I mean, if you blame people, which is certainly what we didn't do in our campaign around prevention and obesity, although it was reported as such and as alleged as such, people need support. They need support to give up smoking, and they need support to lose weight and maintain a healthy weight in the future.
Let me, Joshua Carney makes a point about, and forgive me, Joshua, I don't know how to pronounce your surname. I always struggle with that one. But about this point about, I particularly want to hone in on this point about processed food, because the inequality point that's run as a thread through this conversation, manifests itself also in what we're eating.
Sure, yeah. With
Joshua, far away.
With the focus on obesity, there's also certain foods which we know are lead to increased risks of cancer. So World Health Organization has processed meat as a class 1 carcinogen next to cigarettes. And so wondering whether there might be a greater emphasis on also perhaps subsidizing healthier foods, or maybe even banning processed meats and limiting access to that.
Well, I think the promotion of a healthy diet and physical activity is really important, and we've been looking at trying to persuade the governments over a number of years, not particularly successfully, about a range of policy measures that they could put in place. At the moment, we'd been really promoting the 9 o'clock watershed, particularly as it applies to children, ensuring that there was proper labelling on food. I think this will be a debate that goes on. I think there's a lot government can do, but there's a lot industry can do in getting its own house in order and giving people the information to make informed choices that they're not doing at the moment. And I think it will be an issue that will not go away.
Michelle, thank you. I'm sorry, I'm going to call you Stancliffe's iPad until I actually say it.
Sorry about this. I'm Alison Stancliffe, and I'm not normally on an iPad, so I forgot that. Is it
Alison, did you say?
Yeah.
Alison, you've made this point about the reliance on charity. Do you want to just explain it? And I'm sorry, I read in the chat about your personally.
Yeah, I have, as Michelle will note well, a fairly rare blood cancer called myeloma. Anyway, as you can see, I'm pretty perky this morning, but I just get really anxious. When I first heard Michelle talking about the ratio between charity and government, which I kind of knew in terms of how we fund our cancer care, it really is pretty shocking. Yeah. And I think for you, you've got a terrible tightrope to walk, Michelle, because you want the money in, but at the same time, in a way, you should be talking yourself out of a job. I mean, it's absolutely outrageous to me that my wonderful care at the moment is being subsidized by the people in the street. Philanthropists, goodness, I didn't know how much American philanthropy was going into our care. Is there any hope for changing that? Is it so political, depending on government's priorities? I don't know. I'd really like a word to you about that, from you about that.
So I'd distinguish between the care that's provided by the NHS, which is government funded, and then often what charities will provide, as we do, independent expert information. So about 34 million people a year come to us for that, about cancer, its treatments, what they need to make decisions around their own lives, and often a number of, for us, it's quality improvement programs around the NHS, including our GP facilitators program, which is a small program. What we fund, which is funded by, in large part, the great British public, is extensive cancer research from bench to bedside. And that is about, on average, usually about 400 million a year, which is supported in large part by mass consumer fundraising and donations. We've got a small but growing proportion of income from around the world, and in particular supporting philanthropy. Where I think you're absolutely right is it is really unusual for a charity around the world to play such a key role. 50% of all cancer research funding is provided by Cancer Research UK, and I'm so disappointed and continue to make this point, and would be delighted if I could be happy that the government has not even helped us for a 2-year period. This is this is some of the best research in the world with the best people in the world, and what's benefited is we worked so hard to get that research translated to cancer patients today, whether that's through our clinical trials, the policy work that we do, the new treatments that we support coming to cancer patients through our commercial arm as well.
But it just still gets me that that you were talking about how local authorities had withdrawn support for certain no-scale programs. Again, is it not all to do with people just not understanding that we really need to pay for this care? I think we just don't understand in a way that we ought to, just how much it costs, and that we should be paying for it, not John down the road whose mother died of cancer last week. We should all be sharing this burden, and I don't think we just realise how much it all costs. I mean, I do now, but is there any way that you could do any more lobbying, or is that a really difficult minefield for you?
No, I mean, we consistently call for a change of funding in cancer care and what's needed for the NHS to achieve its survival objectives. And we continue to call on government to support us in the short term around the Life Sciences Charity Partnership Fund, which would be a mechanism to avoid us making cuts over the next 2 years. But no, we're independent. I mean, that's one of the great things about being a charity. We don't receive significant government funding at this point. And that gives us an independence of voice, and we certainly speak up and out on these issues all of the time. I mean, I think what we want to do though is prevent and detect and diagnose cancers much earlier. That in itself would make a massive difference to people's survival, and of course could be a much cheaper way of dealing with an issue, which is because we've got an aging population, the numbers of people getting cancer are only going to increase substantially here in the UK. 1 in 2 of us will get cancer by 2035, but what we'll have is a whole range of treatments, which for some people will be able to, depending on the type of cancer, cure, eliminate or control cancer. That's the hope that underpins all of this research that we invest in every single year.
Michelle, thank you. I'm afraid I see that it's 9 o'clock. So the one question and the glimmer of light that Barney McIntyre was going to bring to this, which was, am I right, Barney? Are you there?
Yes. Hi.
You were just going to talk about vaccines and mRNA technology.
Yeah, it just seems to me that the vaccine development has led to some, massive changes in the way that fundamentally we do research. And I just wondered if, things like mRNA technology that was used in the Pfizer vaccine, whether that's something we could apply to cancer treatments, whether it's something that, whether they're going to pick up the speed of peer review, for instance, for something that is improved over the course of vaccine development. Yeah. Is that something that they're going to bring in into cancer treatment as well?
Well, there's lots of parts to that. I mean, I think one of the things I hear daily is, why can't we move as quickly on cancer as we have on COVID? And what learning can we take? We've seen the COVID vaccine develop so quickly, but discovering a single vaccine or treatment for all types of cancer is really unlikely. And that's because cancer is a highly complex disease with over 200 different types, and each comes with its own set of challenges. So finding a cancer vaccine is extra tricky, because if we find a target for the vaccine, cancer can evolve and outwit the body's immune system. But we are making progress. And an example of this I would give you is one success would be the HPV vaccine, and that's now offered to boys and girls aged between 12 and 13, which offers protection against cancers caused by HPV, including cervical and certain types of mouth, throat and penile cancers. There's also clinical trials underway testing vaccine that stimulate the immune system to attack cancer, and these are being particularly trialled in lung, prostate, head and neck cancer. On the broader point, I'm really hopeful that we can capitalise on the momentum of the COVID-19 vaccine, looking at using new technologies as new insights come forward for diagnosing and treating cancer. And I think the potential for cancer vaccines is hugely exciting, and it could help stop people developing certain cancers in the first place. But cancer is an incredibly complex disease.
Michelle, thank you. It's a measure of the fact that we've got so much to talk about. We're struggling to actually keep ourselves into the hour. Listen, I just wanted to say thank you. We hosted and created these think-ins chiefly so that we could try to understand the things that were driving the news rather than just add to the breaking news. And you know, a conversation like this morning is just so helpful in saying, reminding us that probably 80% of the healthcare issues we face are happening outside hospitals, even outside our healthcare system. And how do we think about all those healthcare policies? We had Michael Marmot come to speak to us just over a year ago and talk about that relationship between inequality and health. And I suppose the thing that I worry about most as we do get into sort of sunnier weather in terms of health and the economy is that we don't really look closely at ourselves and the extent to which, you know, inequality is a health problem and vice versa. And I am really struck by the conversation that, you know, I suppose bounced between Alison, Kate, and others, which is what's the mix that we do want between public donations, big ticket private philanthropy and government funding. And it does feel as though, you know, especially as the population ages, especially as we deal with the scale of hangover from COVID, that these are big issues for us to address. So, you know, thank you for helping us understand the specific issues that, you know, Cancer Research UK is facing, the charitable sector is facing, but we as a society are facing. It's been a really illuminating start to the day.
And I would just say thank you for the questions. It's been really enjoyable. It's gone so quickly. If you do support us, please carry on. If you haven't yet, you know, please support us. It's a really important time. You know, we've got such a huge mission to beat cancer together, and everybody's support in that endeavour is critical.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you very much, everyone, and have a very good day.